Alright. Every 5 years we shed every single atom in our body throughout that period of time. This is my starting thought. So, what that means is that either... Well, here, let me... There seems to be a problem with this. It in itself sounds implausible and impossible. There's a problem with that theory. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong, because I do in all truth believe it is 100% correct. But I don't think people really give it much thought. But if we shed every single atom in our body throughout a 5-year period, that means that as well, the atoms in our brain are shed and created new and replaced. But with the atoms in our brain, they also create consciousness and the neural pathways inside of our brain. But if they are to all be replaced with completely new and separate atoms and other compounds that make up such, what it means is we would, on a subatomic level, lose said consciousness as well. Now, the majority, as far as we know, we can remember things from more longer than 5 years ago. Thus, this in itself creates a scientific problem. Now, it doesn't seem to be possible, but there is a way to actually explain this to where every single neuron in our brain could, in fact, be shed as they are replaced without anything being disrupted. Alright, so let me start on that key introduction point. I believe that our actual consciousness doesn't exist on the same plane of dimension as our physical brain. Now, that's the thing. It begins starting out as mumbo-jumbo, but scientifically, as far as we know, it does actually make sense. Because, let's say it like this. On a subatomic level, say through multiverses or other universes and whatnot, parallel dimensions to ours, let's take it from a supernatural standpoint. If beings did exist on a plane parallel to ours, say in another dimension, and they were more advanced than we are, then say they might not be able to physically, I suppose, interact with us, but perhaps they could affect us, and we could affect them, using what we'd call a gateway. I'm pretty sure it's non-debatable that everyone considers the brain the most developed single individual organ in our body. So, and it's no question, every scientist unanimously agrees that we don't know that much about our brain. We know a lot, but every time one thing is answered, it's the same as our universe. It only opens up an infinite amount more questions. So, suppose our brain is sort of like certain multi-dimensional I don't know the exact term, I don't remember the exact term, tetrahedron collider or something. And perhaps it's almost like a gateway that we can't consciously control. It's almost like a third eye kind of thing. But we can't access it. It sort of does it on its own. This in itself could be scientific. Basically, our consciousness connects to another parallel dimension in our own, of which affects both our dimension and that dimension. But the only way to access it is the atoms in our brain. But here's where it gets, I guess, this is where I might lose a few people. Basically, the problem with us retaining consciousness without our consciousness being in a separate, opposing, but parallel dimension would be the actual sustainment. As one atom is replaced with another, our own consciousness would be disrupted as well. And unless the, I guess you could say, neuron paths could be completely repaired as they were being destroyed and not disrupted at all, because it's like this: if you destroy a neuron path, you can't just simply repair it. It's damaged, and whatever consciousness in the part you've destroyed, it's gone, it's damaged, it may never be found again. But perhaps our neuron pathways is more of a connector. This way, any neuron pathway that we have, as atoms are replaced, the other ones that are there, say at a subatomic level, we replace atoms with our mind unconsciously in sections. Such as, maybe certain neuron pathways are reserved, such as certain parts of our brains, We have whole sections of our brains dedicated to these neuron pathways. And basically that whole section is devoted to one part of our consciousness. Well, perhaps that's where we connect to a parallel plane. Because from a scientific standpoint, we can't just lose atoms in our own brain and have them replaced willy-nilly, because we'd be losing certain portions of consciousness and losing certain tidbits of memory. But if we had a whole section of our brain with certain copies of neuron networks that could all connect to a different plane where it is stored, say like a alternate dimension floppy drive, and our brain is like the plug-in. It's like the female USB to the male USB. And as our brain loses atoms, as certain neural pathways lose atoms, others aren't losing them. Therefore, when one of our neural pathways is being repaired or replaced, the other one takes over and connects into that dip in consciousness on the other plane. Or the metaphorical male USB drive. So it's like this: our brain is like a computer, and the other plane of consciousness is like the USB drive. And we don't exactly have full control over it, but it does make sense, because we can't just replace atoms without losing something in the process. But we can repair and rebuild and shift the burden over to a different part of that lobe of the brain, of which is just extra to do the exact same function. So there's that. But now I wanted to go into a completely separate thing. Paranormal. A lot of people don't consider these things to exist, the paranormal, but and a lot of them, I understand it. But a lot of what can be considered paranormal perhaps lives on another dimension outside of our own precognition. It's like this: if things were to exist in another dimension, then due to certain aligning scientific and physiological and I guess I'm not sure how to explain it. Basically what I'm saying is our neural pathways can affect things on a different dimension and perhaps even create multiverses because of our actions. But also, I think, say we were actually able to figure out our brain in full and access it to the fullest, and okay, it's like this. I'll use an alien analogy, air quotes. Say there was a race that got so developed that they could travel through dimensions by their sheer will of, I guess, whether it be their own physiological development or technological development. These might be what we consider demons or monsters or creatures that, can't be physically proven because we can't see them. Now, from a scientific standpoint, this is quite possible. In fact, CERN right now, I think they did it 2 or 3 weeks ago, has already or is in the process of actually opening up a dimension or a portal to another dimension. Now, that being said, it means we could communicate. And now, here, actually, I wanted to throw in a little tidbit about the possible creation of the universe. I'm a firm Christian believer, but I won't go into that right now. Because I have several theories that I could plug into Christianity and not Christianity. But, say we ourselves do open that portal to another dimension, and we create our own black hole, so to speak. Or, I mean, not black hole, mini Big Bang. And we send it into that dimension. We, in ourselves, could create an entirely new universe through another dimension. Which begs questions. Where did our own Big Bang come from? Perhaps we are the product of someone or something or some being whom has sent a Big Bang through a, whether it be wormhole or CERN portal. Excuse me, sorry, I burped. And we are the product of that. But, I mean, that's the thing. There are things wrong with the initial Big Bang theory. I don't think the Big Bang was the beginning. I think it was our beginning. But I do think someone or something would have to create it. Because it's like this. Before the Big Bang, there was nothing. But well, there's 2 things wrong with that. You can't have a marble of matter floating into space doing nothing. Because before the Big Bang created the right matter in compounds, because before the Big Bang there was no dark energy, there was no dark matter, there was no light energy, and there was no basically there was nothing, and there was no scientific laws to affect it. But that also begs questions as its own, meaning the initial pre-stages of the Big Bang were probably subjected to nothing. No chemical reaction, no laws of space and time, and actual things that were created. Because that's the thing, the Big Bang, after the initial burst, a lot of the matter that exists today was actually created from the things that were created there. In the beginning, there weren't atoms, there weren't even electrons, there were basic particles. There wasn't all this energy, there was an unevenly distributed amount of dark energy and regular energy and dark matter that then we see today. Our universe would be completely different than the initial Big Bang. We take so much for granted, and we assume that, no, when the Big Bang happened, everything came into existence. Well, it didn't. In fact, things right now are still being created by that initial Big Bang that don't yet exist, and laws right now scientifically are still being created by that Big Bang that do not yet exist, because all of the matter in the universe that is to exist has not been created by the compounds. Certain compounds that will affect us in the future do not currently exist today because the right atoms in the right combination have not come into existence yet and combined yet. Meaning, let me get back to my original thought. I'm sorry. And the ignorance of people just irks the shit out of me because we take so much for granted and we assume we're so smart, but we're not. We just sit here and we act like we know everything when we know nothing. And then when we hear someone else's opinion, we shoot them down like we can't be wrong. But the truth is we've always been wrong. In the future, we